Hello, and thank you so much for joining us for the Foundations of Equity workshop for 2019's Elevate conference. My name is Chad Hiu. I have the honor of serving as the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for YMCA of the USA, and we're going to dive right in here. So first and foremost, like I said, we sincerely appreciate your investment of time and of being with us for the wonderful Elevate conference, and a huge shout out to American Express and to our partners at the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance for once again making this opportunity possible. This workshop is designed to be a foundational 101 to help us work through some key definitions as we journey through the rest of the exciting, invigorating, and profound keynotes, workshop presenters, and town halls that you'll be able to experience over the next few days of Elevate. So first and foremost, the work around advancing equity, talking about diversity and inclusion, and really working to ensure that in every school, college, business, institution, or agency of another kind, that everyone feels safe, welcome, and able to help reach their fullest potential and help one another to grow. The work begins with us. And that means that we have to be honest with ourselves about how our individual lived experiences have shaped the lenses that we each see the world through. And we also need to be honest about where we all are as individual human beings, as leaders, along the collective journey of our understanding of equity, inclusion, and diversity, but also how that individual understanding has helped to shape the roles that we've held, the organizations that we lead, the policies that we create, and the relationships that we build. So to start us off, let's work through some key definitions. And a bit of a disclaimer, we all are best friends with the Google, so if we do Google these terms, we'll find a plethora of different definitions. But what I'm about to share with you is how the Y thinks about this work, perhaps as a model for, or one example, I should say, that may be helpful as you journey through your own work. So diversity. Diversity is the presence of differences that makes each person unique. Oftentimes, these differences are used based in human nature or from a systemic lens to categorize one group of people from another. Diversity, the presence of differences that makes each person unique. Inclusion is the full and intentional engagement of all of those differences, of all stakeholder groups. We often say that it's very possible to have an organization or a community that is very diverse but not necessarily inclusive, or an organization or a community that may be inclusive but not necessarily diverse, especially as we start thinking about the many different dimensions of diversity that make up who we each are. And each of you as participants in Elevate received the YMCA's diversity wheel, which we'll share in a little bit to help you understand a little bit more of one potential approach in this work. It's also very important to note, many times with the best of intentions, individuals and organizations will, and I'm using air quotes here, oops our way into diversity. An example of that, we may walk into a room and based on visible dimensions of diversity, the people in this room for this meeting may look quote unquote diverse. So we may snap a picture and say, great, that's a great photo, we should put that on our marketing brochure. That's oopsing our way into diversity. We cannot, or rather it is extremely difficult to oops our way into inclusion. That requires that we meet people where they are. That requires that we allow individuals the space to self-identify rather than placing labels on them. It also requires that we begin to foray into organizational commitment, strategy, a technical side of this work. Equity. I'm going to save that. We have a really cool slides coming up to share a little bit more about how we can think about equity. The context of global, in the Y, we have DIG strategies that we work toward advancing every day that is a strong organizational commitment. DIG is diversity, inclusion, and global. Our belief is that effective organizational work in this area can have an outcome of institutional, organizational, and potentially societal equity. Global is an important term in today's extremely well-connected world, whether we're talking about the interdependencies based on technology, economics, immigration, or everything in between. We can, for most of us, wherever you're sitting right now in the US, listening to this workshop or participating in Elevate, you probably have to do little more than walk outside your door or go to a local gathering place, a house of worship, a shopping mall, a college, your local Starbucks if you have one, to experience the global context of our world. We have to recognize that sometimes by framing the local context of our global communities and really thinking about, as a mentor of mine has recently framed and claimed, having multi-local opportunities for discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion, that helps us to better understand the business case for this work as we move forward. Privilege is an extremely challenging word. 9 times out of 10, when our team is facilitating discussions around diversity, equity, and inclusion, when we say the word privilege, as may be the case for many of us on the line right now, we automatically think about racial privilege. And that is one, very important, but just one of the many dimensions of diversity that experience privilege. A definition that we use, that privilege is an unearned benefit that an individual receives based on a dimension of diversity that they were born with and identify with. So I think we may have all heard the term racial privilege or even white privilege, because in the United States at present, being identified as white or Caucasian places one in the space of being a racial majority. But let me give you 2 other examples that are helpful. One, so I'm originally from Honolulu, Hawaii, born and raised. And if you've ever been to Hawaii, if there is a racial or ethnic majority there, it is Asian Pacific Islander, which I identify with. For the first 18 years of my life, I grew up hearing things, and if I'm honest, I'm going to model vulnerabilities. I hope you all will do as you journey through Elevate here. But I remember hearing things like, I don't see race, I don't see color, we're all just people. That's sort of how I was raised in Hawaii. And then I went to undergraduate at Springfield College in Springfield, Massachusetts. And that's to say that I was no longer a member of the racial majority there is an understatement. As I journeyed through life, one of my good friends and colleagues, Michael Farris from our team here at YUSA, helped me recognize once that although I absolutely am aware that I am perceived to be an Asian American male, because I grew up for the first 18 years of my life being a part of the racial majority in Hawaii, I sometimes move through conversations, even in the mainland US, even organizationally, as if I am a member of the racial group in majority, as if I have racial privilege. That was a really powerful learning for me and a really important distinction, because it was an unearned benefit that still to this day often has me reacting to situations differently than my colleagues, such as Michael perhaps, who have never been in the privilege of being in the racial majority of an entire city or state or organization. Systems change. Simply put, oftentimes organizations and nonprofits and colleges, well, we're so good, and the Y is good at this too. We would develop a ton of programs to address the symptom, not the challenge, right? But the old adage of, if you teach a man to fish, you'll feed him for a day. If you teach a person how to fish, you'll feed them for life. That's essentially what we're talking about when we think about systems change. It's unpacking the structures, of course, the systems, and even exploring what groups put those systems in place, who is benefiting from the systems that are in place, to look at what a lens of equity might be in terms of addressing or even unpacking some of those systems. The last is social responsibility. This is really one of our 3 areas of impact for the Y, and an important alternative gateway in to conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. For some time, we have very much been strategic about how we approach conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion. From whatever lens the organization or the YMCA or the community that we are invited into asks us to enter through. Sometimes we're asked to talk about inclusion, not diversity. Sometimes we're asked to talk about equity, not diversity, inclusion. But 9 times out of 10, the concept of social responsibility, of taking care of everyone in our community, of being able to ensure that our services, our products, whatever it is that we're trying to quote unquote sell, is something that everyone wants to buy. That's something that everyone will oftentimes agree on. So we have to, in our definitions, be very mindful about the words we use and about providing a diversity of entry points to this conversation and this work. So this is the YMCA's Dimensions of Diversity wheel. This was borrowed from Marilyn Loden, who is a really well-known practitioner in the diversity and inclusion world, if you're not familiar, and then Yified, if you'll forgive me, with permission. So when we hear the word diversity, oftentimes we think about specific dimensions based on our sordid history around race that might come to mind, based on some of the huge challenges related to gender equity that might come to mind. But we really, really want to think about diversity as sort of a screen through which we can better understand ourselves as human beings, better understand others, and also better understand every organization, institution, community, and even society that we live in. So this wheel here has a few key components, and I know that you all can see it. So I'm going to highlight three of the components as we look at all the different dimensions of diversity that are here. The first is that we all are a unique individual, that the lens through which we see the world, as I mentioned earlier, is oftentimes colored by the cumulative sum of our lived experiences and how we would self-identify in each of the core, secondary, and organizational dimensions that you see here. A second key component is that the gold rings, the self-identification, collective and global context, that's important and key. So for example, for most of us, how we would self-identify may not be in alignment with how the collective of the world sees us. So I'll give a quick example. When I went to Springfield College, an institution that I love, and the woman that I'm about to share a story about is a good friend of mine to this day, but I remember walking into the registrar's office and having a conversation. And during that time, she sat me down and said, well, Chad, thank you so much for coming. And since you're Asian, maybe you would be interested in joining this specific student group. I think it was a minority student group or something like that. Now she had the best of intentions, but it was the first time that I can remember sort of being told that I was Asian, and definitely first time I can remember being told that I was a minority. Another term that came up in that context was people of color. And had I been given a chance to self-identify, I actually identify probably more so with my geographic location of origin from the secondary dimensions, being from Hawaii. As much as I'm embarrassed to say, because I was a stubborn teenager, I didn't listen to a lot of the lessons around my Japanese, Chinese, and Okinawan American heritage. So therefore, I did not identify with those ethnic backgrounds. However, she, again, with the best of intentions, looked at me and decided for me who I was. Now, how many times, for many of us, if we look at gender, if we look at faith, if we look at diverse ability, if we look at language use and native tongue, our accents, national origin, birthplace, sexual orientation, all of that, the collective of the world will sometimes see us as someone different than who we feel we are. So that's the second concept. The last is intersectionality. Simply put, when we layer one dimension of diversity on another, it creates a unique set of experiences and also sometimes creates either greater access to opportunities or greater inequity of access to opportunities. If you'd like to learn more about this, feel free to visit ymca.net. There's a lot of interactive opportunities there, or you can feel free to reach out. Our contact information is at the end of this workshop. So at the Y, we really are a global movement in every context of the word. When we think about the conversations around equity, and I know that many of you may be studying at institutions that are global or have a global presence or have the opportunity for you to study abroad, which I think is so cool and would strongly encourage you to do so. For some of us that may be working in institutions, organizations, or businesses, whether we are physically based in the United States or around the world, being aware of the global context and the impacts of concepts like economics and migration and communication is crucial in understanding equity. No longer can we have a conversation about equity in the United States without understanding the push and pull factors of spending, of income, and migration around the world. So this is borrowed from the Google and then Yified, our way of thinking about the difference between equality and equity. Sometimes we use these words interchangeably, and we need to be cautious about doing so. So I'm going to take a page from my good friend Jackie Martinez of Seattle Sound Transit and use an example that she gives to define this. So say that we are all in a room together and that we have an issue. And the issue is that no one in this room in which we are all in has shoes. Let's pick a random person in that room, and whatever size, type, and gendered shoe that person is wearing, a lens of equality would mean that we give everyone in the room that same shoe. Equity would mean that we are giving each person a shoe that fits their feet, that allows them to live their life with comfortable footing as they need. That's the easiest way to think about it. We meet people where they are, and we look at providing boxes of support, which is what this diagram shows, for every person to be able to reach the apples on the tree that are the services that they need in order to survive and thrive. Another version of this that has individuals peering over a fence that you may have seen talks about the next level of that being justice, okay? So equity, this is a foundational concept when we start thinking about systems change, because equality is not a pathway toward truly looking at, in a transformative context, if you'll forgive the slightly forward term, undoing systems that may be perpetuating inequities that marginalize and in some cases even oppress individuals based on a dimension of diversity and who they are. So at the why, we have an operational framework because sometimes we say that diversity, equity, and inclusion work is the right thing to do. But honestly, if we even were to think about everyone that's listening to this workshop now, it may not be the right thing to do for all of us in the same way, and that's okay. But there's also a business case to the work around advancing equity, right? And so this is a framework that the Y uses and also is relevant, we found, to many other organizations. In short, think about how your organization or business does your work. What are the core areas in which you operate? For the Y, these are ours. Then our suggestion is always to begin to explore through a DIG committee or a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. What are the policies, practices, and procedures that govern and guide how we do everything that we do for everyone that we serve, every product that we generate, but starting first with our staff and looking to align that and ensure that every policy, practices, and procedure exemplifies our commitment to inclusion, diversity, and equity, so that the experience that every human being has when they come into contact with our team, with our product, or with any service that we provide, that our stakeholders would say that they've experienced this in a way that is inclusive and equitable. So there's also some guiding principles of this. Sometimes we need to have both the soft and the hard skills to this, right? And so the slide you just saw before was really about the technical side of advancing, operationalizing, and institutionalizing equity and inclusion. These are the guiding principles that can be what, for us at the Y, we sometimes suggest that local Ys give this to, maybe the 18 or 17-year-old that is working at the Welcome Center on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, or the group exercise instructor who may only work with us or volunteer with us 2 hours a week. But everyone in our organization needs to be able to understand that no matter what their role is, we all are helping to build empathy, to ensure that all people feel safe and welcome, but also to challenge one another individually and challenge each other organizationally around whether or not we are truly modeling equity in every way that we can. So leading with empathy in all interactions and activities, recognizing, valuing, and embracing all dimensions of diversity and working toward the greatest possible inclusion, fostering a safe exchange of ideas, beliefs, and perspectives within and through the Y or your organization locally and globally, and advancing social equity and bridge building across and within all organizations and communities. So with that, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. And if there's anything that our team can do to be of help or support, reach out to us.